Next, I'm going to compare an optic that is not actually mounted at the moment. That is this 6-24 Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2. Really decent scope. I've had it on a number of rifles and owned it for a while. Probably have quite a few rounds through this one in particular compared to some of the other optics which are newer to me. And so this will be an interesting comparison because my eye is pretty familiar with this, hopefully not lazy with detail here, but I'll just compare some of the features with this. I haven't been, comparing the eye focus piece because, again, if it's not a regular issue with optics, I don't say that much about it. They all work. All the optics you're going to see today have a really great eye focus adjustment for the reticle. This one in particular has a nice rubber piece around it and a little bit of an abrasion resistance. There's a rubber piece there in case you get rookie bite and you don't know what you're doing. So let's move on to the actual magnification lever, if I can speak, my goodness. The magnification lever here. So you can buy a cattail or mag assist for this. They have those out there, but there is a little bit of a knob and a hub right there. And the knob is enough to grab onto. It's got some pyramids on it, but the pyramids are like going down. And so I would say it's a little bit smooth compared to the amount of resistance. You do have to put some force into this. Some people actually kind of like that because they don't want their magnification getting bumped. Because this is the first focal plane and it doesn't really matter if it gets bumped a little bit one way or another for me, I don't care. Both of these are first focal plane. Everything that you're looking at today as a comparison are first focal plane. I don't mind if it gets bumped. The main thing though that I should talk about and compare is how smooth is it, how much resistance, and it's very smooth. It's very, very smooth. It's just more firm. It's more firm than a lot of the other ones as well. Maybe similar to the Blackhound for resistance, which would make sense. Yeah, it's pretty similar to that. So again, there's a slight difference here. This is a 6-24 and that is a 4-25, but they're close enough that I will make some comparisons here. I'll go to the turrets real quick. These are lift to operate turrets and these are just direct dial, but the side is also a lift to operate turret. So there's a similarity there. This one has lift to operate on both elevation and windage. And I'm going to say, if I can bring this in a little bit. Okay, here's what I'm going to say about that. I think the Athlon Helos has a little bit more clicky feel to it. It's a little bit higher pitch sound too when I click those turrets, and some people like that. I think it's just slightly more audible myself, and that can be an advantage. It's not needed. I don't have to have it, but it's an advantage for some people. They just want to hear it. They want to know it. It helps confirm for them. But as long as the numbers line up, I'm pretty good to go. And so this one, yeah, I would say the actual sound and feel might be preferable for some people. This is still a really high quality feel. There's nothing wrong with these at all. I don't have even really much of a critique there. I would say the distance and the ridges, the valleys, as you're going up and down over those little bumps, you feel it when you're turning it. I would say this just feels a little bit more like I could skip past a few numbers fast just because of the way that it bumps over. So if you were trying to get to 1.3 and not, skip over, I don't think it'd be too much of a problem for you getting those 0.1 of a mil increments. It's just a little bit more focus so that you don't skip past it. That's just kind of the way that I feel about that. Turrets are good though, and I'm going to say for all purposes they're pretty much equal in feel. This has less internal travel than this does. I think this has right around 29 mils with the Athlon, and obviously this one again has 46, best in class. They're both 34 millimeter tubes. Everything that we're looking at today is a 34 millimeter tube first focal plane. I should probably talk about illumination just real quick. Again, illumination on this guy has never been daylight bright to me. I've never thought that this was like pretty bright, but it's good for dusk and dawn. So again, illumination is going to be better on the Zeiss. The actual dial here, though, it is tactile enough. It's got a good grip to it. and I just don't have any complaints about that. But if you need a daylight bright, I guess this, you know, it's not going to be quite there for you. I don't need that though. The parallax knob goes down to 10 yards. So here is an area that is clearly superior than the Zeiss. Having a parallax knob that goes down to 10 yards is awesome. I love that. On air guns and setting a plumb bob, if I'm inside and I just need to get the reticle lined up and level, I like being able to go down to 10 yards. Also, squirrel hunting or critter hunting, or if you're deer hunting and something just comes in really, really close, even with these heavy magnification scopes, it's nice to have 10 yards. I really like that. I pretty much always prefer to have 10 yards. Now, the Zeiss has 15, so that's roughly like 16 yards. There's not a huge difference there, and if you back off the magnification, it's a little easier to deal with. But parallax matters more when you're close than it does when you're far, actually, generally. So if you were trying to adjust for 50 yards and it was off by quite a bit, you know, it'd probably be pretty fuzzy, and your point of impact could be an issue if there's just an error there between distances. I don't use optics that have a minimum of 50 yard parallax for NRL 22, because at 25 yards, if it's a 50 yard parallax, it does bother me quite a bit. And if I'm shooting on like 10 or 12 power, it does cause me to miss sometimes, especially on the KYL rec, which is something to notice. If you're shooting varmints, that could also be an issue there. So yeah, I'm just going to say that the 10 yard is a win. I like that. It does have an aggressive texture on the dial, which is good. You kind of need it. It's firm. It's very, very smooth. I wouldn't say that it's like a bad firm. It's just it requires some effort to move it. Very similar to the magnification ring. Requires some intentional effort. The only downside to that, guys, is generally when you're getting all leveled out on your rifle, if you're shooting in the prone and you're comfortable and you just start touching that parallax a little bit, it does kind of monkey with your rifle, and maybe it'll pull it to one side. You know, if you're pushing the magnification ring over, it might push your rifle a little bit over, but that's really nitpicking stuff, and most of you don't care about that. I'll say with the numbers on there, for my eye, these numbers, it does have numerical indicators: 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, 200 yards, 500 yards, and it goes right up to infinity. I will say the numbers lined up really well for me. Even at like 500 yards versus the infinity, I could tell really quickly that, yeah, that number is just about on where the numerical indicator is for my eye. So whatever that's worth to you, but most expensive scopes, they don't put that on there because people return the scopes when the numbers don't line up for their eye and the way they want it to be. And some people don't even know how to use parallax anyways. It's a really frustrating thing. So most of the higher end scopes, instead of dealing with that, they just don't have numbers on them really at all, and they just use the range. And you don't need it. You really don't. It's kind of a handicap. It could be faster for you if you're just setting a general range right before you're in a stage, or you're going to be switching between distances, just setting a general range. I could understand that being handy, but you really use your eye, and it's a quick thing. When I'm up on a barricade and I'm just going to run this real quickly to get that distance back and forth, it's not that hard for me to just look in the optic and quickly crank my parallax to where it should be instead of looking at a number on the side. So there's my 2 bits about that. Now I'm going to quickly look at the reticle here, and it does have, it's a decent eye relief, I should say. Pretty decent. It's not too touchy. I think Athlon did a good job with this. Yeah, that's not too touchy. I feel pretty good about the eye relief. It's probably every bit as good as that Zeiss. Okay, now to the reticle. Just real quickly talk about this reticle. Again, 10 mils is great unless you're shooting a 308, 175 or 185 grain bullet at 1,000 yards, and then holdover wise, you need more than the 10. And so I would say most reticles should go to 12 or 15 if they're trying to be PRS compatible or competitive in that area, just for holdovers and quicker shots on bigger targets. But this has 10, and that's going to do fine for most people. It's a pretty good reticle. It's not too busy for most people, and it has enough information for other people like me that like busier reticles. Okay, going to the edges of the glass here. Let's see. There's a light tinge of yellow around the far edges of the glass. Just a light tinge of yellow that I'm picking up. Again, looking at 200 yards here. And looking at my steel, I would say the image seems just a little bit dull. I'm going to look at the Zeiss for a second here. All right, yeah, I'm going to have to say the Athlon compared to this is just way more dull. Even with the parallax set really nice and tight to the image or to the target, I'm going to say this image is just brighter. The contrast is superior. The edges of the target much more clear. The grays, silvers, there's a little brown down there, red, and then orange. It's much more clear. The contrast on these targets and the impacts and what I'm seeing down there on paper, it's just so much easier to pick out that image and the edges of the images, or the edges of the target here. So that's one thing that's standing out to me pretty quick. I feel like the Athlon image, although it's still pretty good and in the price range, it's probably one of the better ones. Okay. Yep, it's not there. It's not quite as good. The glass is not like blurry, and when I look down at the bottom of the reticle with the numbers compared to the center of the glass, just looking to see if it gets a little foggy or fuzzy towards the edges, and it's not foggy or fuzzy per se. It's still pretty good. Yeah, I don't think that would inhibit me from like using the optic for holdovers on 10 mils at the bottom of my reticle. Let's go ahead and just dial this sucker out. I will say I don't have any tunneling just yet, but I'm going to run it to the extreme end of the range here. Okay, there we go. Yeah, a little bit. There's a little bit of tunneling now. Like there's a little, yeah, you can just see that the erector tube assembly has moved, to the extreme ends of range there. And I'm getting just a little bit of maybe fishbowl, but that's on the extreme ends of the range, guys. I'm not shooting a place where most people are ever going to see their glass. I'm not looking through it at a place where most people are ever going to see it. They're usually going to zero it on a 20 or 30 MOA rail, not a 60 MOA rail or anything like that. Yeah, with just the center of the glass image is really, really good. And I still feel like I can dial quite a few mils, 20, 25 mils before I was noticing any bit of that fishbowl. It's pretty minor. I'll say this, as far as that minor fishbowl goes and a little bit of the tunneling and stuff that I see when I go to the extreme ends of the range, the Zeiss and this are not that different. This maybe has just a little less on the Zeiss, a little bit less than the Athlon does at the extreme ends of range. Now that's impressive because this has 46 mils and it's doing it in a 34 millimeter tube, and this is a 34 millimeter tube and it's doing 29 mils, and I'm getting a little bit of that error in the image with just the 26, 27, whatever I was dialing there. I'm getting a little bit of it compared to the Zeiss, which just a little bit, and it's definitely at the extremes. It goes away relatively quick as I start to dial and evens out, levels out pretty good. So the glass quality now. So with glass quality, this is a little bit more dull. It's not quite as bright of an image. Again, this is a 50 millimeter objective. This is a 56. So it's not a guarantee. Just because you have a 56 millimeter objective doesn't mean that the 50 is going to be less bright. I would say this is slightly more dull. And that's going to come back to just the quality of glass. This is a Chinese made optic. This is a Japanese made optic. And yeah, the glass is noticeably different. It should be. There's a big price difference though between these. And I think Athlon is impressive in what they got away with in this optic. They did really well with it. It's not a bad optic at all. Not a bad optic. I've been really happy with this, but it is not as good as the Zeiss in almost every way. It's not as preferable either, which matters a lot. I prefer even the Zeiss over this in the functions and the way that the image looks and how things operate on the optic itself. But that being said, I don't want to rag too hard on this optic because I think pretty highly of it. It's a very good optic. It's a great reticle. It's not quite as good as the Zeiss, but I have done a lot of shooting with this, and I haven't done enough videos actually with this thing for how good it is. All right, so starting off on 5 power on the ZeroTech, floating to 25 power. Pretty smooth. No slop in the head. The collar itself doesn't have any slop. Don't need to use the cattail, and it has a pretty good aggressive texture. Hands can grab onto. Doesn't feel like it's going to slip. Nice and smooth, not choppy. Nothing in there that's like slipping at all. It's just engaging. 5 to 25, pretty smooth, and the cattail is removable, and there's a nub under that if you need that instead, so it doesn't run into your bolt handle. And that just attaches with an Allen. Pretty smooth. Going from 4 power to 25 power on the Zeiss. And very, very smooth. I would say, as far as resistance goes, just slightly more resistance than the ZeroTech, but much, much tighter tolerances. And even the cold that hasn't seized up on me, which is the important thing, it's really, really smooth. The lubricity that's inside is even. There's absolutely no play or slop in there. And this is a removable cattail or magnification assist lever. It has 3 positions depending on where you're going to throw it. I have mine on there so that when I'm at 25 power, it's all the way down on the left side. Doesn't interfere with the bolt. And when I go down to 4 power, if I was to use one of these other positions, it would run in the way. It would interfere, but it does not interfere when I'm on 4 power and I'm on the far left position, so that's where I keep mine. I'm going to say the Zeiss is smoother overall, and the texture is good. Don't really need the magnification assist unless you're going to go quickly between 4 and 25 power, or 10 to 25 power, maybe shooting long range or spotting for someone else. All right, on the ZeroTech, parallax goes from 15 meters up to infinity. Very, very smooth. Good texture. No slippage. And it's not overly heavy on the resistance. It feels exactly how it should. It's pretty much a perfect parallax dial. And 15 meters is nice. You can use it for air guns or leveling your reticle with a plumb bob at close distances. The Zeiss goes all the way down to 15 meters as well, so I think that's something like 16 yards, 16.4 yards maybe. And this one does not have numerical indicators, but it has a widening line to give you an idea. And there are 2 white portions in there, actually 3. 3 white portions in the lines, so you don't get lost in your rotation, and you could probably use those as a memory marker for distances. There's 4 lines. Okay, I'm sorry. There's 4 white lines, and then it goes up to infinity. And I find 1,000 yards to be right around somewhere in here, usually for my eye. It is definitely a little bit, just a little bit smoother. As far as tension goes, I feel slightly less tension. And the grip, though, the texture on the Zeiss is not as aggressive as it is on the ZeroTech. And I actually prefer the texture on the ZeroTech, especially in the wintertime. I could slip on this just a little bit, but it's not a big deal. I just prefer more texture when I can have it. Windage on the Zeiss is lift to operate, and it's pretty smooth. Clicks are pretty tactile and have dialed and tracked exactly to the 10th. The Zeiss is just, or the ZeroTech is just slightly more soft and smooth. So I'm going to give that to the Zeiss as well. All right, now on to a pretty important point and something that is going to set up the price difference between these two just a little bit more. So I'm going to go to 25 power on both of them. And I'm just going to judge a little bit of glass quality. I already know a little bit about the glass quality differences, but just optically, when I'm looking here at 200 yards, just what I'm seeing at 200 yards as far as differences, what I can appreciate about both of them, and just which one is a better image. All right, starting off with ZeroTech here. I do have some Mirage today. Definitely have some Mirage. I'm just going to set that parallax perfectly. There it is. Okay. Parallax is perfect. And so on 25 power, you know, the edge to edge kind of conversation clarity, it's really not bad. It's not too bad. It's definitely an improvement from a few years ago. If you were to have a 5 to 25 from like 5 years ago versus this one in the same price point, there's a real noticeable difference. The glass is better. It's definitely better. As far as the, yeah, I'm going to say a little bit of chromatic aberration. Looking at the steel target down here at 200 yards, yeah, there's a little bit around the edges of the steel. It's pretty minimal. On 25 power right now, yeah, it's pretty minimal. Colors, trueness of those colors, let's say it's real close. Now the sun did come out, and the light, this is a little bit of a cheat for me to compare because it's sunny out. Looks nice. The image is always going to look a little better on a day like today with just basically perfect lighting conditions. But it's a good image. It's very solid. If you've watched any videos that I've done with this ZeroTech 525, I've shot it past 1,000 yards and been really happy with my image quality. Okay. So yeah, on the edges, a little bit. If I go to the extreme edges, and if I dial this to the extreme edges of the optic, or what I should say is the end of range of travel, and then I look at that glass quality here at 200 yards, the very bottom of the glass, I'm actually going to back this off just a little bit, it's still pretty good. That's really not bad. I think ZeroTech did a really nice job with this optic. I'm telling you, that glass is not bad at all, and I'm at the extreme end of range. Usually on most optics, especially Chinese optics that I've experienced, I've just noticed that when I go to the end of range of travel and I look out, I will start to see some fuzziness there, sometimes a little bit of tunneling in the image itself. I can notice a little bit of tunneling, but it's hardly any at all. Hardly any at all. It's so much that let me just see here. Gosh, yeah. I think most people wouldn't even notice it. It's just a minor amount of tunneling. Glass is pretty dang decent. Colors, pretty true. Chromatic aberration is not bad. There is some there. I'm not saying that there's no CA, but it's pretty small. And eye relief on this optic is just a bit touchy at 25 power. I'm going to say, yeah, it's going to be more touchy than the Zeiss is. The Zeiss has a better eye relief, I believe. I'm just going off my memory here. And field of view is decent. I don't talk a lot about field of view because when I'm looking at optics that are up to 25 power, unless it's really bad, I don't want to talk about it that much. None of them are really, really good. There's just some that are slightly better than others. And this is a 56 millimeter Bell. Remember that this objective here is 56 millimeters versus the Zeiss, which is a 50. But I'm going to say glass is really good even when I dial to the end of range. It's not bad on the CA. Reticle looked pretty clear. The edge of the reticle on the number 10 with the hold over there, when I dial to the end and I kind of change my magnification here to about, what is that? About 19 power. The numbers are not quite as clear as the center of the glass is, and especially when I dial on it, so I noticed that. But now let's go ahead and compare this to the glass and the image in the Zeiss. Yeah, one thing I'll just say about the parallax that I'm noticing is that when I set the parallax on the Zeiss, because the glass quality is just quite a bit better, it helps me when I'm setting the parallax as well. I can just really tell when it's clear and when it's not as clear as it should be, because the difference between the two is quite a bit. If you have a crappy piece of glass, sometimes setting parallax is harder just because it's kind of a blurry image. The ZeroTech is not a bad piece of glass. It's decent, but the Zeiss is definitely better. It is more clear. Even with this little bit of mirage I'm dealing with down there, it is better. It's noticeably better. But you would expect that, guys. Again, with the price difference between these two, it is over twice the price of the ZeroTech. Really nice and clear. CA is really low, but there is some. And that is the truth. Like I said, I want to be really transparent in this review. There is some chromatic aberration. And this is the Japanese piece of glass. There's a slight bit of tunneling. Remember, I have this on a 55 MOA rail. And so when I dial and I'm about 10 mils in from my 0, it reduces that tunneling a little bit. When I go back to my 0, yep, there is a little bit of tunneling. I would say it feels a little bit more than what I dealt with the ZeroTech. So I noticed that. It doesn't make the image unpleasant to look at, and it's not odd, it's not fishbowl. Okay, and go ahead. And just remember that this optic has some of the best in class range of travel. It's 46 mils versus the ZeroTech, which is going to be around, it's 26 or 28. I think I want to say 28 with that. And I go to the end of the range of travel here. And I'm on 25 power. iBox, definitely better. Definitely better. End of the range of travel. Let's see. A little touchy. The image is slightly affected by this, by going this far. The center of the glass that I'm looking through looks pretty decent. I'm going to back off the magnification just to get a look at this. Yep, that helped a little bit, but there's a little tunneling. And at 25 power, slight CA on that steel target I'm looking at. It's a red and orange steel target with gray, and I'm just getting a little bit of purple. A small, well, maybe it's blue, a really small amount on one of the edges. Not as much as the ZeroTech had, but there's a little bit there. Okay, backing off. I definitely prefer the reticle in the Zeiss. There's more holdover. I think it's more technical, but I like the information. So it's just a preference. And I'm going to back this off a little bit. Yeah, better eye relief in general. Not as touchy of an eye box. Slight tunneling. And in the range of travel here, even though it has a lot, I think there's just, if I can be critical, there's a little bit more tunneling than I would expect in an optic in this price range. But it's not a deal breaker for me. And one more thing just to mention is brightness between the two. I'm going to say brightness of image, the Zeiss takes it. The Zeiss is definitely a brighter image. Colors are truer. Field of view, it's not bad. Like I said, I'm not going to compare those too much, but it's not bad at all. Let's go all the way down to 25. It's pretty good. It's not going to hinder me in a competition or shooting or hunting. And I'm probably not going to shoot on 25 power anyways in any of those scenarios. Mostly spotting. But if I was spotting for somebody, there's a nice field of view. I could see where their misses were if I was shooting at distance. And the color is so good. The image is so pleasing to the eye. I think it'd be easy to pick out bullet falling even into weeds or grass. It's just a really nice contrast. Like the contrast of the image is better than the ZeroTech is, as you would expect. looks very, very good. Edges, the extreme edges of the glass, as far as the conversation of edge to edge clarity goes, yeah, it's obvious. It is obviously better.